This is when the forging of the sword begins. In a coal oven with hand-pumped bellows, the steel is heated until it is soft and malleable. Then, using hammers, the master swordsmith flattens out the steel. When the steel is flat enough, it is then bent back on itself, and it is then hammered again to press the steel back together into a solid block. Folding does two very important things. First, it spreads out the impurities, like silicon, sulfur, and phosphorus. Second, it gives the steel a grain. After folding the sword, it is now reinforced in the direction that it will be hit in combat.
Okay, so there is a direction of, it creates a pattern, okay? And then those lines can be ascribed as a grain. The reason why this is problematic is that on a smaller level, on a microscopic level, there is also a grain in the steel. This grain forms when the steel moves from certain phases from being heated up and cooled down. And so when the steel gets heated up to a certain level, it adopts the austenite phase, which is literally the way the atoms kind of are arranged. And when it gets cooled down, the way those atoms then, I guess, rest into creates a crystal structure or a grain, and you can actually, like, you see it, there's visual representation that shows how these crystals, like, they grow out in like pockets, and then when those crystals growing in pockets, and this is how the atoms are settling, right? When those crystal structures touch, it creates a grain in between those crystal structures.
If we look closely at the surface of the zinc, we see it's built up of many different patches. The patches you see are crystals or grains of zinc. Here's a piece of a different metal. It's been machined along one edge. You can't see any grains in this surface. However, if we turn it over, it's quite a different story. This piece of metal has been broken in half. Along the broken edge, you can see some of the grains from which this material is made. At a number of points in the liquid metal, tiny crystals begin to form and grow. Each crystal grows outwards in all directions until it meets the surfaces of its neighboring crystals. In engineering terms, each fully grown crystal is called a grain.
All right. That grain gets reset every time you heat up the steel into the austenite phase. And any type of grain structure that you force into a blade through forging gets taken out when you heat it up to that stage.
As the metal is squashed between the rollers, it's being cold worked. Let's find out what effect the cold working has on the grain structure of the aluminium. The cold rolled piece of metal is the one at the top. Can you see the difference? We seem to have changed the shape of the grains. They've become elongated. Let's see what effect heating has on the distorted grain structure. In the case of this particular metal, nothing happens until the temperature reaches about 350 degrees centigrade. Now, at the grain boundaries, new grains begin to form. These grow rapidly until a new, undistorted grain structure completely replaces the old, distorted one. We call this process recrystallization.
And so there is a phase in the smithing process that they call normalizing, where they will heat up the shape of the blade, right, and let it cool down naturally, then heat it up and cool it down naturally, and they're normalizing the steel to reset the grain structure, because sometimes the grain structure that gets put into steel, when you're hammering it down, like you're compressing those grain structures when you're hammering it down, can be detrimental. And it's far better, and also can cause warps on the quench. And so it's far better to let the grain structure adopt its natural state, depending on the speed in which you quench it then. And then you can manipulate the grain structure. Now, sometimes you can strengthen steel by compressing grain structure. That's not what's happening here, because they're going to reset it when they heat it up again. There is the fact that certain different layers of oxidization gets trapped in the lines. That creates a pattern or a grain in that sense, and that's literally what Derek Veritasium says here. But it seems like he's implying the grain structure that appears through the layering strengthens the steel.
It gives the steel a grain. After folding the sword, it is now reinforced in the direction that it will be hit in combat.
When it doesn't, and not when it's heated up to the austenite phase, which literally is what they're doing in the quench. That's specifically made to reset the grain structure on the microscopic level. Thanks for visiting the Shadlands, the place to find quick and easy to watch sword-related content. This video was a supercut or clip from a larger Shadiversity video. If you'd like to see the full-length video, please click on the provided links, and I hope to see you in the future.